Dr. Jessica Ash here. I am honored to be accompanied by a wonderful professor from the University of Cincinnati today, and we are going to discuss the future of higher education post-COVID. So I would like to welcome Dr. Sonja Aldrus.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Yes, I'm very happy that you could take time from your very busy schedule to be with us. And so I'd like to start with what challenges in particular have you seen this past year with regard to education and COVID? And tell us a little bit about what you teach.
Sure. So I'm a primarily first-year college writing instructor. I teach other classes too, but that's the bulk of what I teach. I also lead the program. I am the composition coordinator, so I'm sort of overseeing all of our composition faculty as they work on these courses too. So I would say, starting back a year ago today, right, everybody was prepping their classes. We had very few online sections of our first year composition course, English 1001. In fact, I think I might have been the only online instructor for that course. So yeah, it was really a challenge then when we were told that at spring break, we would come back online. So there was a mad rush to get everyone, not just faculty, but students ready to be online because of course they hadn't prepared for that. And so really that COVID shift, as we all called it, was, it was just a breakneck speed pace to get everybody some content online. We had a lot of part-time instructors and they didn't necessarily have anything more than their syllabus up in their course in that online space because they didn't need it, right? They felt like everything was delivered in class. So transitioning students from coming to class to get materials to checking their course online to get materials was a real struggle. And a lot of students typically in spring at my institution kind of fall off the radar after spring break anyway. So that extra couple of days that we gave everybody and then the online shift, it was really it was really troubling for students who might have made it, but were kind of on that cusp. And a lot of our faculty members learned a lot about, how to use their course management system and in a very short amount of time.
And that we didn't know how to before.
Exactly. They learned how to do grading in that system, for instance. We had a lot of people who had never used the grade book because they kept a paper grade book. And now suddenly their students needed to be able to see their grades, right? Because they're not going to hand back a paper. Right. And so that was a big shift for a lot of our folks. In terms of our students, we saw roughly the same number of students sign up for the summer that we have seen in previous summers. And in the summers, we traditionally offer a lot of online courses anyway. So I think that's part of it. It was not a huge shift for our student population. But certainly students wanted face-to-face and it just wasn't even on the schedule, right? We had early on made the shift. So that was not even available. But I think summer outcomes looked pretty good. Those are typically shorter classes. We offer a lot of half semester classes. And the students who choose to do that are going to be a little more focused. Fall was a totally different ballgame. So many people had been holding out hope that we would be back face-to-face, and it just was not an option. And so students who really didn't believe they could learn online because of their senior year experience, many of them found that they could learn online. Some of them were just never really past that threshold of discouragement of having to be online. And so they struggled the whole term. We had much higher dropout rates for the term than we typically do in fall. Fall is usually a huge success for us, with spring and summer being the lighter load semesters.
Yeah,
it was just really brutal. So many students who had way more responsibility than they would typically have.
Yeah,
and just access was a huge issue.
Yes, and the idea of being interactive and online is it's a hurdle for some professors to overcome. And we found a great need to be more, a lot more hand-holding at our university. I want to take a moment to tell you that there are many people watching. We have 7 countries represented right now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Shout out to Christian Barget for watching, and thank you for everyone else who's with us today. So Dr. Anders, are most of your students from the US?
I would say if we're talking percentages, most, yes. When we look at an individual class section, you might have more than half are international students or have an international background. So one of the things that is tricky at my institution is that we only classify the international students as international when they come through UC International.
Right.
So if they are here on a different kind of visa than a student visa, but are taking classes for us, they don't get classified that way. So our statistical numbers are not as high as they would be when we actually look at who the students are and where their origin story
Right.
would be from. So a lot of them might have come over as, a high school student with their parents, and now they're in college with us.
Right. So this area, although I think it's funny that we're in the center of the country, so people have this perception that it's kind of isolated.
Right.
But we have a large network of people. We have a huge refugee population from many countries in Africa, from Bhutan, from south of the US, and that could be any one of the countries south of us. Are there any particular populations that you notice?
We recruit heavily from China and other areas. I would call it, Eastern Asian population. So we do see quite a substantial number of those, but we have a lot of African students, and those students tend not to be registered as international students for us because they've come here either on their own work visa or with their parents or with a spouse. And so we have a really high African population.
Wow. And so I think that's important for our viewers to know that even though we're in Cincinnati, the whole world is kind of represented here. And from what you're saying about your and your students' experiences this past year, I've noticed financial pressure. With the drop in enrollments, the financial pressure on universities is very high.
Yeah, there were a lot of discussions about what was being cut. Of course, those conversations started back in March with everything shutting down, and of course we understand too that we're a public institution, and so a lot of our funding comes from the taxes. And if nothing is happening in sales tax, then nothing's happening with the state budget, right? That things are going to have to get slashed. But also when enrollment is down, it makes it really difficult to make decisions about growth. We were in a strategic planning and initiative cycle where we were looking at building new programs and doing big, bold new things. And then all of a sudden this hits. And so, you have to start talking about which of those new initiatives are going to stay and which are going to go, which things that you have going on can stay and which can go.
And
of course,
systems.
Yeah.
You don't really need as much like physical healthcare on campus because people aren't coming to campus.
Right.
So you can let go of a little bit of that stuff. And but the budgets have just been cut so drastically for such a long time that we're talking about so we're supposed to be eventually talking about the future. And I don't think that higher education, and I'm wondering this isn't phrased like a question, but it is a question. I think that it's going to be very hard for even the best schools, especially like Harvard, to demand the high price of tuition that they have been in recent years. So what are your thoughts on that, Sonja?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of the conversation back in March was we should be refunded part of our tuition. And then as we rolled into summer, parents were still saying, I'm not paying that much on tuition. And then fall. I think one of the tricks is that the fees that students pay are so ridiculously high, and they're paying for things that they'll never use, right? So everybody's paying for the football program, for instance. Everybody's paying for the new student union workout center. And if you're not using that, if you're not attending those things, it can seem ridiculous to pay that fee anyway. But then when no one's on campus, like really, why are we paying for that fee? And I understand how bonds work, right? And we took out the money before, and now we're having to pay it back. But I think that that's one of the areas where there's going to be a lot of pushback the longer that we stay online, or the more online growth we have, that online students are not going to want to pay for physical things that they're not accessing. Tuition dollars, kind of depends on the institution, but tuition dollars can be pretty lean. And so, when we're talking about paying your faculty members, we already have too many underpaid faculty members. So
Yeah.
part-time faculty, contingent faculty of any sort, um, that's where they're going to cut first, right? And that just isn't fair. It just isn't right. So I think that we have a responsibility to shift the conversation as those of us who have some capital in it, but also have some understanding of what's going on to help those outside of the system kind of understand where the fluff and that total dollar they're paying might be coming from. But yeah, I think it's going to have to change.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm sure that some creative problem solving will help in that area. We had somebody just join us from, I'm not sure where she's from, but to Shile. She wants to know what this is. And we're talking about the future of higher education post-COVID. So maybe she's a college student or something. So anyway, we were talking about budgets and what other kind of programmatic changes do you think will happen in the upcoming years?
Yeah. So I think, we've sort of borrowed from Peter to pay Paul this year and kind of waiting to see where all of the numbers finally fall out in terms of what kind of money we get from the state. And I think it's true even for private institutions that they've kind of had to put some like building projects on hold in order to pay the academic budget in a way. And so then I think what's going to happen is programs that we might have started that would have been a little riskier, things that we wouldn't be entirely certain would work, are probably not going to be adopted. So even things that we had already given the go-to for will probably be rolled back, just because I think it's really hard to put money into something that you don't know if students are going to come to. And
I agree.
Anything that was kind of in the bubble, that's probably going to get axed at most schools.
In addition to that, one of the things I really noticed about faculty was, or moving forward, what I should say is the need for us to be, well, I'm not faculty, I should say, I'm academic staff. But there is a need for us to act like leaders. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very easy for somebody who's actually labeled faculty, who has all of these benefits and all of these protections, to just say, I'm not doing it. I don't have to, not in my contract. And I think that our students need us to lead them through this nightmare.
Yes, they do.
And beyond that, like, we're educational leaders. It doesn't matter if we teach biology or what. If we have students who fall asleep in class or they've got a bad attitude, our job is to help them grow up to become their best selves, no matter what our content area is. And I was really disappointed with faculty who didn't rise to that that realization.
Yeah.
But I would like to take one moment to really applaud a tennis teacher at Miami. And he's a great guy. I've been working with him for many years because he's helped many international students. And he called me up. He said, how do I teach tennis online?
That is a trick.
This is tricky. And so it was funny because most of the people in his positions just dropped the course. But he knew that some students needed that PE credit to graduate. And he didn't want to cause, that kind of problem for a student by canceling. So, oh my goodness, he and I started finding videos all over the internet about how to play tennis. And I was even like, he would teach me some of his warm-ups. And I would go out of my driveway and make my husband film me doing these tennis warm-ups in the driveway. And then we would post them. And really, I'm so proud of Dawn Gilchrist for doing that, for being brave enough to say, okay, I'll teach tennis online. And we had students submitting videos of them, hitting balls in the air. And so we really had a lot of fun with it. And I think there's going to be a lot more of that critical thinking and creative problem solving and really coming together as leaders of children.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's tricky is that a lot of our faculty members tend to think of the traditional age college student as having a real sense of how to use their technology, right? So they're like, well, they know how to do it better than I do. But the reality is they don't. That's not something that they've had to use their tech for in the past. They've used their tech for entertainment purposes. So shifting our thinking about what we need to teach and how we need to teach it for the online environment also requires us to think about how we need to prepare the student to be able to use the tech to do those things. Mm-hmm. right? And so that's been an interesting sort of hiccup along the way for, I think, all of us at some point, but certainly for the hordes of faculty across the country who've had to make this move online, right?
I've created a lot of, I think that Captura,
Mhm.
you can make these screen shots or screen videos of how to find this button
Right.
and how to find that button. And so we've made a lot of those. And, one of the things that I would like to call on all higher ed faculty and one of my academic staff to lead you. And I know they're adults, but that being said, some of them are 19 and 18 and not necessarily mature. And beyond that, we know that biological psychology teaches us that the human brain is not mature until they're 25.
Right.
So we have a lot of opportunity to influence our students, not only in physics or art history, but I start every class by saying, I want to congratulate you. Despite the chaos in the world, you have chosen to be present here, to grow your mind and to grow yourself. And really, when this is all over, the people who do choose to do that, first of all, we have to congratulate them and reward them deliberately and say, I'm so happy that you're here, and you will be in a better place when the cloud is gone.
Yeah, yeah. And we have a lot of students who are middle school and early high school students in the College Credit Plus dual enrollment program.
Right.
So starting in 6th grade, they can come to us.
Sixth
And
grade.
that's incredible, right? But it's insane too, because you're trying to manage sometimes very young students who academically excel more than your other students, but who have these different kinds of needs for being able to manage the task, along with frequently non-traditional students, right? Because we have open access regional colleges, and so we have open access students who enroll there, and they can take classes at any one of the institutions then in the UC system.
Yeah.
So you never know who you're going to get. These high
Yeah.
school students, middle school students, someone in their 50s trying to retrain for something, or just because they finally wanted to get a degree.
Yeah, it's amazing. You just reminded me of of CCP, College Credit Plus.
Right.
That there are anthropology teachers who have some content that, or and history teachers that have content that's risque, or it's controversial,
Mhm.
and that's fine if somebody's over 18. And even if they're in high school, when they were just high school students, it was a little easier to say to the parents, hey, your child is taking an adult class. Just,
Right.
I want you to know that. But now with 12 and 13-year-olds,
It's tough.
and the parents are watching, so
Yeah, and I think there was a real shift in, sort of how students studented this last year.
Mhm.
But most of them are, they're observing recorded lectures.
Mhm.
Maybe they have a synchronous class, so there's something that they're logging into. But yeah, those really kids, right? They're like 12, 13 years
Yeah.
old. Their parents are definitely sitting next to them because they want to be sure that they're getting the work done. Whereas when we were coming to campus, right, they would have to drop them off the door and leave,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
We did have parents who sat in the hallway and waited, right? So I just want to be sure that she stays and she gets what she needs and she doesn't freak out when it's over. Can't find me in the busy hallway.
Right.
So, it's this sort of helicopter parent we used to talk about, but in a different way. But certainly, I think there are a number of faculty members who got emails that were clearly written by a parent, even if it came from the student account, about the content in their course, which we wouldn't have seen before, right? Because
Yeah.
we were face to face and they just didn't have that kind of access to what their student was looking at.
There is an element of accountability in that, both for the student and the faculty member, or academic staff who's teaching. Like, you don't just get to go on your political rampage or whatever.
Right.
So I think that that's a good kind of, there are benefits and disadvantages to having parents in the room with you.
Indeed. I mean, I've had a parent take the class with her daughter. The daughter was, 18, had just graduated from high school, and the parent was just coming back to college to finish a degree she started years and years and years ago.
Wow.
So it isn't as if it's completely brand new to those of us who tend to work with more dynamic populations, but it is different for sure when you don't know they're there, right? When they're just sort of the shadow beside the student.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of the, so in not just parenting, but regarding higher education and the students, in the past, you could expect a student, or you could try to act like a student,
Hmm.
to do their homework, to understand that they have obligations.
Right.
But we're seeing students who don't act like students, and they don't perceive the need. And this is partly the generation.
Hmm.
Um, to give you an example, not from higher ed, there was an employee at my husband's business who didn't come to work. She came to work 2 hours late, and then she wasn't paid for the 2 hours that she wasn't there, and
Right.
she complained.
Boggles the mind a little, but I mean, yeah, I think that their understanding of responsibility is different, in part because of the ways that they were parented, right? When we can kind of trace parenting theory and things that were promoted. Um, but I think also the ways that K through 12 schools, not just public schools, also private schools, have sort of shifted the way that they grade, the way that they offer feedback, the way that they manage behaviors. A
Yeah.
lot of those things have shifted in the last, I would say, really 20 years. So that what we were seeing for a while that everybody complained about with millennials, there's a different problem, but it's maybe an even bigger problem that we're seeing come into the classroom now, where they don't expect to get a zero and it mean a zero. Right? I don't know what else it would mean. You didn't do it, so I don't know
Yeah,
what.
or like, that was homework. I expected you to do it. And they're like, oh, that's what that means. I didn't know that. But I think that we're going to have to not excuse that behavior, but accommodate for this. I mean, so we now have a generation who's been exposed to long-term trauma.
Yep.
And I think that if we are educational leaders, we're going to have to help them grow up and help them overcome and help them find their resilience. One of the things I'm thinking that maybe this, so this generation isn't known for its resilience or its ability to overcome. But I think that we may see that this generation does have a greater ability to act like a duck and let the water roll off their back. But I think we're also going to have to help them more, whether that's helping them to click the right button or how to submit their homework. But also, this is a point right now between you and me, but also between our students. It is a point of privileged connectivity.
Mhm.
And I can't say that enough, that I'm so happy that I can actually see another human and engage with you and interact with you. And that it's going to be our job, whether we're online or whether we go back, to help students meet that road.
Yep.
And not just say, well, get on the road.
Exactly. There's a kind of accommodations thinking, right? So we either demand something or we accommodate people where they are and help them get where we want them to be. And so I think that for a lot of faculty, they're already there. They're already thinking about, why are they not doing this? How can I help understand help them understand what I'm trying to get them to do? And then how can they help me understand why they can't do it yet? And so that idea of sort of bridging what I wanted with what you're already able to do so that we
Yes.
get where you can get, that kind of thinking of what teaching is, right,
Yeah.
is a new mindset for some faculty who think you just deliver the information, tell them the task, and they magically do it.
Yeah. And as an English teacher, there's this saying, we teach students how to write by demanding that they do it.
Yes.
And I don't think that we can do that. And
Yeah.
I want to be very clear that you're not talking about letting them get away with old behaviors. You're talking about building their ability to meet the standards, but starting where the student is.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
building them up so that they can be globally mobile.
Yes. And I think that a lot of people assume that a student who comes to college is not just academically college ready, but they're also socially and emotionally college ready. And I think a lot of what those gaps are social and emotional disconnects in their readiness to be there. So sometimes they're just overwhelmed, right? They look at the task, they could academically perform that, but there's so much else in the way of getting to that spot of thinking about it in that academic way. And so it's our job to sort of break through the noise, figure out what's going on with each individual student. And yes, that's a lot of work. And yes, I know our classes are too big. And yes, I know teaching online was already more work. But I think it isn't going to go away. We're going to continue to see it in our face-to-face classrooms, that these are the kinds of needs that students present with.
Yes. Yes. And I have, so um, I've switched to a lot of help. I just say, I'm helping you become your best self.
Mhm.
So I help them learn how to resolve conflict. I help them understand their own personality in relation to other people's. Like, if I'm an introvert, which at the end of the day, I am an introvert, even though I present like an extrovert. If I need my quiet time, leave me alone.
Right.
And so you have to teach the extrovert to like back off a little, and you have to teach the introvert to speak up for themselves and say, hey, listen, I need a little quiet time.
Exactly.
All of this kind of social emotional growth, it doesn't necessarily occur within the family if the parents are trying to protect their children, which that's what parents do. Parents try to protect their children.
Right.
And they, so students have to stumble.
Mhm.
I was not a popular parent in that I used to say, I hope my child falls down one step. Because if the child falls down one step, they get a boo-boo, but then they look at that staircase in a whole new way.
Exactly.
Very different from me saying, don't fall on the stairs.
Mhm.
So, these adult, uh, young adults, we'll call them young adults, they
Mhm.
have to make their own mistakes. They have to get their zero and look at their teacher and say, oh, I got a zero. I,
Yes.
I
Yeah.
better learn from that. And that's okay. That's how humans learn.
It is for sure, for sure. And so, I think when we couple the just the stage that they're in life, right, with the trauma, and then for many of our students, there's a cultural aspect to coming to college, right? They're
Yeah.
not accustomed to this environment and this culture and this way of thinking and seeing things. And so when we put all of that together, and then they're not getting to come to the face-to-face classroom where we could sort of unpack a lot of that in half a second, right, and move on. It's a lot. It's easy to see how students are overwhelmed, and then it's also easy to see how faculty members are overwhelmed because they didn't understand that that was happening, and or maybe they saw it but they didn't know what to do about it.
And if we could all, whether we're students or teachers, see this, as I was saying earlier, as a privileged point of connection for personal growth. Like, we can all grow. And I'll have some students say, oh, I'm sorry, I have bad internet. And I'll say, stop talking about bad internet. We all have bad internet. I get kicked out of my own classroom.
Yep.
So I say, don't focus on that. Focus on the fact that you're connecting. You choose, even if you get kicked out, you choose to come back.
Exactly.
So I don't want you to apologize. I want to say, congratulations. You keep trying. In this community, I think that is kind of what's rising. If there's a froth on top of the bad coffee we're drinking, the froth would be that there is this group of leaders who are emerging and choosing to be connected and choosing to try to grow and choosing to try to help others grow. And I think that's great.
It is. It is. One of the really shining points of the 2020 year was seeing new student organizations form. So here they are, they're fully online, they're having to make connections inside classes where sometimes they don't even meet live. It's just entirely asynchronous. Um, and they're working with faculty members that they've met maybe in previous terms, maybe it's a current term professor, to build these awesome student groups. And so in some cases, the idea might have come from a faculty or staff member, and they start recruiting students, but the students are recruiting other students. And we've seen just an enormous number of student organizations, official and unofficial,
Wonderful.
emerge during this time.
That's wonderful. Great
It's
student
fabulous.
support.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. Well, do you have anything else that you think about the future of higher education post COVID?
I think a lot of us learned things about who we are as teachers, who we are as as individuals during this time, and so I think that we're going to see differences in the ways people teach. Some
Yeah.
people are going to be really inspired by what they learned they could do online.
Mhm.
And some people are going to be like, I never want to do it that way again. So they learn what not to do. But I think that's the way that we actually learn, right? Is to try something out, fail epically, and then move forward again. Um, that's always been my practice anyway.
Yes,
So I think we're going to see a big shift.
and more confidence with it. I click the wrong button every day.
Oh yeah.
And I was giving a presentation to 2,000 people in Iraq. And it was like 5 minutes before they told me your PowerPoint isn't actually up. And I was like,
Oh,
oh my God. They were trying to be so polite, but
right.
they didn't want to tell me. And but you have to laugh at yourself when you make those kind of blunders
Yeah,
and slough it off and
that's
move
right.
on.
That's right.
Dr. Anders, I want to thank you very much for being with us here today, and thank you to all the viewers who joined us. We had some educators from Iraq join us, from India, from Pakistan. We have some people from China, so I want to thank the international community that joined us today.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for being here. And thanks, Jessica, again for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, you're welcome, and so I'll say goodbye then.
All right. Bye.